Today I'm sewing and sharing a great overalls pattern for summer comfort on the go. I'm using McCall's 7547. This pattern has a few different views. You can sew pants by themselves, full overalls, or short overalls as I'm doing in this video. The shorts version makes this a great low yardage pattern. You can find this pattern at your local fabric store or online. I've left a link for you below so that you can check out all the details, grab a copy, and sew it along with me. Cut out your fabric, mark those dots and notches, and let's get started. For this project, we cut 2 waistband pieces. Go ahead and apply interfacing to the wrong side of one of those pieces now. Grab your back short pieces and let's prepare our darts. I've transferred my darts from the pattern piece to the top edges of both of the short pieces. And now I'm ready to pin them in place. Fold your dart in half and pin through one dart leg and out the other. Do this for both of the back pieces, sew from the outer edge to the point, leaving thread tails at the end so that you can tie them in knots. I've taken my back pocket pieces to my ironing board, and I've pressed the upper raw edge to the wrong side by 1/4 inch, and then I press that top edge an additional 1 inch to the right side of the fabric. Do this for both of your pockets, and then pin those corners in place. Take them to your sewing machine and stitch down these corners just along each outer edge, stopping at the end of this fold with a 5/8 inch seam allowance. Now we're going to trim this area, leaving a 1/4 inch seam allowance. Cut right along the edge of this 1/4 inch bottom flap and straight down the edge of that vertical stitching with a 1/4 inch remaining here. Do that on both sides of your pocket for both pockets. Now you can turn this top flap right side out and poke out your corners. Then go back to your ironing board and press all of the remaining edges to the wrong side by 5/8 of an inch all the way around, and do this for both pockets. Edge stitch close to your bottom fold all the way across both pockets. On your pattern piece, you have dots indicating where we're going to be placing our pocket. I've transferred these dots to my pattern piece to the wrong side, and now I'm going to use pins to transfer them to the right side. Just creating a corner marking so I know where to place the tops of my pockets. Now I'll place the top of my pocket at those markings and pin in place. Once you have that pocket pinned in place, remove your inner pins. We're going to do 2 rows of stitching to secure this pocket. Edge stitch all along the outer edges, close to the edge of that pocket, about 1/8 of an inch. And then you're going to start a fresh set of stitches, top stitching all the way around the pocket once more with a 1/4 inch seam allowance. You can choose to apply your pocket to the right back pant only as per the pattern instructions, or you can put a pocket on both sides as I've done. On your pattern piece for the front of the pant, you have this flap that's going to be removed for the right side only. So go ahead and cut that flap off for your right pant piece only. Place your front and back pant pieces right side together and pin or clip that inner seam. Do this for both sets of front and back pieces and sew this seam with a 5/8 inch seam allowance. Serge your seams to finish. Open up your pant piece along this seam so that it's laying out flat, and place both sets of front and back pieces right sides together. Pin along this rise section. Now we're going to take it to our machine and sew all around the rise with a 5/8 inch seam allowance. When you get to this section here that only the left side of the pant has this flap area, sew 5/8 of an inch away from that right front edge. Now to clean up my inner seams, I'm going to serge this fly section on both sides separately, and then I'm going to serge the rest of the seam together. Now I'm going to reinforce this inner curve from the single notch on my front pieces to the double notches on my back piece. I'm going to sew about 1/4 inch away from the original stitching line from notch to notch. Right at the base of these flaps where the right and left seam allowances join, I'm going to clip into that seam allowance to the seam line. This way I can press this section open and not be fighting with that seam allowance down here. So go ahead and press that open with your iron. Now with this fly extension pressed to the left side of the pant, and with my fly stitching line transferred to the front of my pant on the left side, I'm going to use this transferred line as my stitching guide, sewing that faux fly extension to the front of the left pant. We're also going to be edge stitching and top stitching on the right side of the pant. Starting at the top of your pant, you're going to be sewing this seam allowance all along the right side, edge stitching first about 1/8 of an inch away from the original stitching line for the entirety of this seam. Then you're going to start a fresh set of stitches 1/4 of an inch away from that seam line, again from the top of the front of the pant, all the way across to the top of the back pant. Place your front and back pant pieces right sides together and pin or clip your side seams. Sew the right side of your pant from top to bottom with a 5/8 inch seam allowance and serge your seams to finish. On the left side of the pant, you have a dot from your pattern piece indicating where your zipper is going to be placed. Just sew from that dot to the bottom of the pant with a 5/8 inch seam allowance. Then I'm going to sew both sides of these seams separately. Make sure to backstitch at this dot marking to secure. Now we're going to sew basting stitches all along the upper edge of the pant. Stitch using the longest stitch length on your machine with about a 1/2 inch seam allowance all the way around. Also make sure that you leave extra threads at the beginning and at the end of your stitching so that you have threads to pull for easing. To prepare for installing our zipper, we're going to press the seam allowances on the front and the back of this opened edge of the left side with 2 different seam allowances. On the back of the pant, you're going to press the seam allowance to the inside by 1/2 of an inch. And on the front of the pant, you're going to press that seam allowance to the wrong side by 5/8 of an inch. Now with my zipper face up, I'm going to place it right sides together with that flap that's pressed underneath the back part of my pant. With the raw edge of my zipper flush with the top of the raw edge of my pant, I'm going to pin in place all along the length of the zipper so that the zipper teeth on the right side are close to the edge of that fold. I've changed the foot on my machine to my zipper foot. I'm going to edge stitch along the fold of the fabric, sewing the back of the pant to the zipper tape from the top of the pant to the slit here in the zipper opening. Now that we have the left side of our zipper attached to the back of the pant, we're going to take the front of the pant, lay that edge on top of the back pant. Because of the way that we pressed both of those seams, the front edge of the pant will extend 1/8 of an inch beyond the left edge of your pant. Pin the left side of the front of the pant to the other side of your zipper tape. I think it's going to be easiest for me to sew from the inside of the pant. I'm going to sew from the top of the zipper all the way down to the zipper slit, using my zipper foot to get as close as I can to the teeth on this side. And when I get to the bottom where the slit is, I'm going to pivot my stitching and sew horizontally to meet the stitching on the other side. Backstitch to secure. Now my zipper is installed and it looks like this, with the overlap of the front of the pant concealing the zipper from view. For the carriers, the instructions say to fold your piece right sides together and sew this edge with a 1/2 inch seam allowance and then turn it to the right side. But if you're working with a thicker fabric, it's going to be nearly impossible to turn this right side out. So instead, I'm going to take this to my ironing board and fold both of the raw edges to the inside by 1/2 of an inch, and then fold this all in half lengthwise and give that a good press. Now that I have this strip pressed to enclose the raw edges, we're going to edge stitch 1/8 of an inch away from both sides. Cut this strip into 4 sections for the belt loops. Each belt loop will be 3 3/4 inches long. On your front and back pattern piece, you had square markings indicating where to place your belt loops. Match up each belt loop with those markings and pin in place. Grab your uninterfaced waistband piece, And note the squares that you transferred from your pattern piece, which indicate where to match the waistband to the waistline. Place your waistband right sides together with the pant piece, matching your center square to your right side seam and pin in place, and then matching the remaining squares to the corresponding edges of the pants on the left side. And then continue pinning in place all the way around. As you're pinning the front of the pant, you may find that this is where you can pull your easing stitches to ease in the fullness of the front of the pant to fit the waistline. Once you have that waistband applied and you've eased your stitching accordingly, stitch all the way around the top edge with a 5/8 inch seam allowance. Now trim this seam all the way around by about half. And press the remaining seam allowance up toward the waistband. Now that that waistband is sewn on and our seam is pressed upward, we're going to take the raw edge of our belt loops, fold them up over the waistband. You can decide how much ease you want in that belt loop and trim off some of the excess accordingly. I'm going to trim off about 1/2 inch from each belt loop. Then I'm going to take that trimmed raw edge and match it up with the raw edge of the waistband and pin in place. Do this for all 4 belt loops. And then go to your machine and baste the top of each belt loop in place. Place your bib front pieces right sides together and pin the center seam. Sew this seam with a 5/8 inch seam allowance and serge your seam to finish, and then press the seam toward the right side. Take your bib front facing to your ironing board and press up the lower edge to the wrong side by 1/4 inch. Now place that unfolded raw edge right sides together with the top raw edge of your bib front and pin in place. Sew that top edge and both side edges of that facing with a 5/8 inch seam allowance, making sure to catch the folded edges on both sides as you sew. We're going to trim this top section just as we did to trim the top of the pockets. Start trimming at the top of that folded edge, and then trim leaving a 1/4 inch seam allowance. Also trim those corners. Now you can turn this facing section right side out and poke out those corners. And then give that a good press. And while you're at the ironing station, go ahead and press the sides of the bib to the wrong side by 5/8 inch. And do this along both of those side curved edges. We're going to do rolled hems on both sides. Take that raw edge and fold it to the crease, and then fold that folded portion on top of itself along the crease and pin in place from top to bottom. We're going to edge stitch this folded edge in place, sewing close to that folded edge from the bottom of the bib to the top of that folded area, and then when you get to the top of your facing, continue stitching at the same width all the way to the top of your bib and back stitch in place. Do this on both sides. Now we're going to top stitch this folded edge of your facing in place, just as we did for the top of the pocket. We're also going to edge stitch along the right side of the front bib from top to bottom, sewing that seam allowance to the front of the bib as we go. We're going to do this stitching twice, once about 1/8 inch away from the original seam line, and then the next set of stitches will be a 1/4 inch away from that seam line. And here's what that center seam of my bib looks like with the 2 rows of stitching. At the top of the front waistband, I've transferred the dots from my pattern piece to indicate where my bib is going to go. I'm going to place the bottom raw edge of my bib right sides together with the top raw edge of my waistband, matching the dots from my bib pattern piece to the dots on my waistband. Also match your center fronts and pin in place. Now take this to machine and baste your bib to your waistband. Now place your bib back sections right sides together, and then sew that seam with a 5/8 inch seam allowance, serge the seam to finish, and press the seam again to the right side of the garment. Now we're going to edge stitch and top stitch this seam just as we did for the front bib. You're going to sew this seam to the back bib, first 1/8 inch away from the original stitch line, and then again 1/4 inch from top to bottom. I've gone ahead and pressed both of my side curved edges of the back bib to the wrong side by 5/8 inch, and now we're going to do a rolled hem for these sides just as we did for the front bib. and then edge stitch in place on both sides. We're also going to do rolled hems on both of the long edges of our shoulder straps. Take these pieces to your ironing board and press both of the side edges to the wrong side by 5/8 of an inch, and then roll those hems and pin in place. And then edge stitch each side as we did for the bibs. Now we're going to take the angled edges of our straps and place them right sides together with the top of the back bib, matching the placement symbols from your pattern piece, and pin in place. And then baste your straps in place. I've taken my bib back facing piece to the ironing board and pressed the side edges to the wrong side by 5/8 of an inch. At the top of this triangle, you can do a little bit of origami here to get the pointed edge to stay pointed. Just fold those edges to the inside at the top, and then you'll have this overhang here. Just press that top edge down so that it folds itself through the layers to keep that pointed edge, and pin in place. Place the unfolded raw edge of your back bib facing piece along the top edge of your back bib, sandwiching your shoulder straps in between. Go ahead and sew that top edge with a 5/8 inch seam allowance, and then trim this seam. Now we're going to open out this top seam, the facing and the straps outward, and turn this facing to the inside of the garment, right along the seam that we just sewed. And I'm going to pin my facing to the back bib so that this seam is nice and flush and the tip of my triangle meets the center seam. Edge stitch this facing in place. Place the bottom of the back bib right sides together with the top of the back waistband, matching your center backs and your other pattern markings, and pin in place. Baste that back bib to your back waistband. I've taken my remaining waistband piece that's interfaced to the ironing board, and I've pressed the lower edge to the wrong side by 5/8 of an inch. And now I'm going to trim this pressed edge to 3/8 of an inch. Now place the top unfolded edge of your interfaced waistband right sides together with your other waistband, sandwiching your bibs in between, and pin all the way around. Now we're going to go to our sewing machine and connect these waistbands with a 5/8 inch seam allowance all the way around. We're also going to sew both short ends together, catching the fold as you sew, and do this for both short ends of your waistband. Now that I have the long and short ends of my waistband sewn, I'm going to clip both of these corners and then trim all of the remaining seam allowances by half. Turn this waistband right side out, poking out my corners. Then we're going to take the folded edge of our interfaced waistband and then place it over the bottom edge of our main waistband, just covering those stitches. And using a needle and thread, I'm going to slip stitch all around the bottom of the waistband from side to side. Now that my waistband is complete, slip stitched all around the bottom, I'm ready to attach my hardware to the straps. I'm going to slip the raw edge of my strap right side up through this hook piece right side up. Then on the back side of this hook piece, I'm going to thread that bottom raw edge once more through the top. Now because the straps are very short, I'm just going to let them extend as far as they'll go and then sew the bottoms in place. I'm going to fold this bottom raw edge to the wrong side by about 1/4 of an inch. And with that strap all the way to the bottom as far as it goes, I'm going to take that part that I've tucked under at the end and pin it in place. And using my zipper foot, I'm going to edge stitch that in place, and I'm going to do this for both of my hook pieces. And then to apply my jean buttons to the front bib, I'm going to use a awl to poke a hole at both of the top corners, about 5/8 of an inch away from both edges, right at that top corner. Now I'm going to take the spiky part of the button and poke it through the wrong side, and then place the button piece on top of that spike. And then working from the back side, I'm going to use a hammer to tap that into place. And do that on both sides. Then we're going to sew a buttonhole and attach a button right above our side zipper. The instructions say to apply the button to the part of the waistband that's extending beyond the zipper area, But I'm choosing to apply the button on the shorter side and the buttonhole at the extension so that this flap is on the outside. So go ahead and sew your button and buttonhole to your preference to close this area. And the very last step is to hem the bottom of the overalls. We're going to do a rolled hem again as we've done earlier, pressing the bottom of the overalls to the wrong side by 5/8 of an inch, rolling the raw edge to the crease and then on the crease, and edge stitching close to that inner fold all the way around. Do this for both bottom edges and you're all done with your overalls. Thank you for watching this sew along. Make sure you check out my other videos for more great sewing inspiration, and I'll see you in the next video.